Welcome to Serial Napper, the bedtime podcast for people who fall asleep to true crime. This episode gets dark, so if you're sensitive to graphic content, maybe skip the nightcap. You've been warned. Hey everyone, my name is Nikki Young, and this is Serial Napper, the true crime podcast for naps. I'm back with another true crime story to lull you to sleep, or perhaps to give you nightmares. In 1999, Rachel Barber was a teenage dancer on her way to stardom. At just 15 years old, she was already studying full-time at the prestigious dance factory in Melbourne, Australia. She was beautiful, athletic, magnetic, the kind of person who seemed to just glide through life just as effortlessly as she moved across a stage. But someone was watching. Someone who didn't see Rachel as inspiring, they saw her as a threat. On the morning of March 1st, 1999, Rachel's dad, Michael Barber, dropped her off at Wattle Park train station, just like he did every day. She was supposed to ride the train into Richmond, grab breakfast with a friend, and then head to class. As she gathered her things to hop out of the car, Michael reminded her that he'd be back at 6:15 p.m. to pick her up. Rachel smiled, agreed, and with her usual dancer's grace, pranced up the steps into the station. Michael watched her until she disappeared. He had no idea that would be the last time he'd ever see his daughter alive. Later that evening, when Rachel didn't show up at their meeting spot, panic began to set in. No one had seen her or heard from her. Rachel had vanished. What started out as a missing persons case would soon unravel into one of the most disturbing crimes in Australian history, a case driven by obsession, jealousy, and betrayal. Because Rachel wasn't taken by a stranger. She was lured by someone she trusted, someone who once babysat her, and someone who wanted nothing more than to become her. So, dim the lights, put your phone down, and listen to the story of Rachel Barber, a teenager full of promise, a family's worst nightmare, and a chilling reminder that the most dangerous people, they're often the ones standing right next to us. So, let's jump right in. Before the headlines, before the search, before the betrayal, Rachel Barber was just a teenage girl, a girl with big dreams, ridiculous talent, and a family that absolutely adored her. Born on September 12, 1983, Rachel grew up in Melbourne, Australia, in a warm, creative home. Her parents, Michael and Elizabeth, they had built a life full of love and imagination, even if money was always tight. Michael worked as a toy designer. Elizabeth was a children's author. And together they raised 3 daughters in a modest house that always seemed to be bursting with music, dancing, and laughter. Rachel was the oldest of 3. At just 15 years old, she was already turning heads with her natural grace, her striking emerald green eyes, and that rare kind of charisma that you can't teach people. It was something that she was lucky enough to be born with, and others certainly took notice. She lived to dance and danced to live. It wasn't just a hobby. It was her everything. From the moment she could walk, Rachel was twirling. By high school, she had left traditional schooling behind and she enrolled full-time at the dance factory in Richmond, a move that changed everything for her. It was a difficult choice for her parents to make, allowing their young daughter to basically leave the academics and pursue dance full-time. It also had some financial implications because it meant that they had to move. But they truly believed in their daughter's abilities and her future. At the dance factory, Rachel found her people, other kids who were just as obsessed with movement, with performance, with turning their bodies into art. She started picking up modeling gigs on the side. She met her first love, a boy named Manny, and for the first time in a long time, Rachel felt like she belonged. But it hadn't always been that way. Despite what people saw on the surface, the beauty, the poise, the confidence, Rachel had her struggles like anyone does. Big ones. She battled intense anxiety and deep insecurities. She was terrified of the dark, afraid to talk to strangers, paralyzed at the thought of getting on public transport alone. Even walking into a store by herself, that could send her into a panic. School had been another challenge. Traditional subjects like math and science, they made her feel like she was drowning. At times, it left her so overwhelmed that she spiraled into depression. Her mom, Elizabeth, used to joke that Rachel was 15 going on 12. Not to be cruel, but to reflect on just how much her daughter still needed her. And so, when it became clear that Rachel was drowning in the traditional school system, her parents made the bold but necessary move to put her where she thrived, in a school dedicated to dance. And it worked. Rachel came alive at the dance factory. She was excelling in a space where she finally felt understood. She was happy and she was loved. However, most tragically of all, Rachel had no idea that while she was living the life of her dreams, someone from her past was watching her from the shadows. Someone who didn't want her to succeed. Someone who didn't just envy her life, they wanted to steal it. But more on that in a minute. The date was March 1st, 1999. It was supposed to be just another Monday. Rachel Barber got up, grabbed her things, and jumped in the car with her dad, Michael. He drove her to the Wattle Park train station, same as he always did. Rachel's morning routine was down to a science. She'd catch the train into Richmond, meet her friend for breakfast, then walk to dance school. Before she got out of the car, Michael reminded her that he'd be back at 6:15 sharp to pick her up. Rachel smiled, and in that effortlessly elegant way of hers, she pranced up the stairs into the station. He waited just long enough to see her disappear. Then he drove away, and that would be the last time he ever saw his daughter alive. According to some, that day Rachel seemed a little off, a little distracted. She told a few of her friends that she had, quote, something important happening after class. But she wouldn't say what. She said it was something big and it would pay her a lot of money, enough to buy this pair of high-heeled shoes she had been eyeing, but her parents couldn't afford. Many of her friends and her boyfriend figured that she had probably booked a modeling gig. It was something that Rachel had dabbled in, and the girl was absolutely beautiful. So they didn't really question it any further. Later that evening, Michael returned to the train station at 6:15 p.m. sharp. Same time, same place. The train rolled in, and he looked for her face in the crowd. Nothing. Okay, no big deal, he thought. Maybe she missed it. Maybe she got caught up chatting with her boyfriend. Maybe she caught a later train. So he waited and waited and waited. Train after train pulled into that station. Doors opened, people got off, but Rachel wasn't one of them. And this was 1999, so no texting, no, hey dad, running late, just silence. And the longer it stretched out, the heavier it became. Michael eventually drove home, probably telling himself not to panic. Maybe she caught a ride. Maybe she was already there, sitting at the kitchen table. But the moment he walked through the door, he knew. Elizabeth looked at him and said what he was dreading to hear. Rachel wasn't home. She never came home. Rachel Barber didn't just disappear, she vanished. And from the second her parents realized that she wasn't on that train, they knew that something was wrong. Rachel was reliable to a fault. She never went anywhere without checking in. And she definitely wouldn't have just ghosted her whole family, especially not her little sisters who worshipped her. But when Michael and Elizabeth called the police, desperate for help, they were met with a giant dismissive shrug. She's probably just a runaway. Teenagers do this all the time. Yeah, well, not Rachel. We hear this time and again in stories just like this, and it's frustrating. Nobody knows a child like their parents, and not all teens are hiding secrets, sneaking around, getting into trouble, and running away. Her parents were furious and terrified. They knew their daughter better than anyone, and they were watching the hours tick by while the people who were supposed to help them were brushing them off. So they started their own search. Posters, phone calls, asking around, knocking on doors. They traced her steps, talked to her friends, and retraced that morning over and over again. Her boyfriend, Manny, was the one to let them know about that job that was supposed to pay a lot of money, but he didn't have any other details beyond that. And it was really strange because Rachel had never mentioned taking on a job. What kind of job was it, and why was she hiding it? As police started piecing together Rachel's last known movements, they interviewed her classmates, trying to rebuild a timeline, moment by moment, of her final hours. And that's when the story started to feel off. This whole job thing caught their attention, and they needed to know more because it could be the key to finding her. Earlier that Monday, March 1st, Rachel had made a few cryptic comments to her friends. To one classmate, a boy named Andrews, she hinted that she had big plans that night. She told him she was going to, quote, make a lot of money. And when he asked her who it was with, Rachel said it was someone that he didn't know. She promised she'd explain everything the next day. Spoiler alert, she never got the chance. That same afternoon, Rachel had pointed out a pair of $100 shoes to her boyfriend, Manny. She told him she'd be buying them tomorrow, Tuesday, once she had some cash. Because again, she was off to do a job that night. A mysterious job. Allegedly with an old female friend, which is weird, right? Because 15-year-olds don't typically do odd jobs with vague women for wads of cash. But at the time, no one really thought much of it. Around 4 p.m., Rachel asked a classmate named Dominic Corella if he could give her a ride to Bridge Road after school. But when classes ended around 5:30 p.m., she changed her mind. She told Dominic that she'd make her own way there. Another student, Tamara Gunn, also noticed that something was off. When she asked Rachel where she was headed, Rachel said she was walking to Bridge Road and then her dad would pick her up at the end of the tram line. Tamara offered to walk with her, but Rachel declined. And here's the thing. Rachel normally took the tram line in the opposite direction towards Wattle Park. But that evening, she was seen walking west on Church Street towards Bridge Road alone. And that was the last confirmed sighting of Rachel Barber at 5:45 p.m. The final glimpse of a bright, talented girl walking straight into a trap she didn't even know was waiting for her. Police were completely puzzled, unsure of where to look for her. All they really knew was they needed to figure out what this job was and the identity of this old female friend that she was said to be meeting that evening. For the first few days, the case was mostly quiet. Then, finally, a break. A full week later, a girl named Allison, a former dance classmate, came forward with some strange information. She said she remembered seeing Rachel that night. She'd been on a train heading towards Pran, and she hadn't been alone. Sitting beside Rachel was a heavier-set older girl. The two of them were chatting easily, even laughing. Whoever she was, Rachel clearly knew her, trusted her. They looked totally at ease. The train stopped at Pran Station, and the mystery girl and Rachel got off together. They even waved goodbye. It was the first real lead in the case, and suddenly this didn't look like a runaway. This looked like a setup. Using the description that Allison gave them, they were able to put together a sketch of the woman that they were looking for, but no one in Rachel's life really recognized her. Investigators started pulling phone records, and that's when they found something else, something weird. 2 calls had been made to the Barber house the day before Rachel disappeared. Both came from a private number. Both lasted more than 15 minutes. Now, her family remembered seeing her on the phone at that time, but they didn't know who she had been talking to. However, the police were able to identify the caller, a 20-year-old woman named Caroline Robertson. a person who matched the description of the older woman seen on the train with Rachel. And when the Barbers heard that name, their blood ran cold because they knew her. Caroline wasn't some stranger. She had been in their home many times before. She had babysat Rachel and her sisters when they were younger. She was a close family friend. So who was Caroline Robertson? To put it bluntly, Caroline was everything that Rachel wasn't, at least in her own eyes. 5 years older than Rachel, Caroline had always been described as forgettable. She was awkward, withdrawn, unfashionable, severely depressed. The kind of girl who melted into the background, invisible to most. But Rachel, she thought that they were friends. And according to people who knew Caroline, she would sometimes refer to Rachel as her best friend. Which, if you think about it, is kind of odd and inappropriate. A friendship like that between a 15-year-old girl and a 20-year-old woman, they wouldn't really have much in common, except that they had been in each other's lives for quite some time. Caroline wormed her way into the Barber family through a connection with the Barbers' youngest daughter. Caroline's little sister was friends with one of Rachel's sisters, which meant that Caroline, over time, became their babysitter. At one point, they had even lived across the street from one another. And from there, she became something else entirely, because as she babysat the Barber girls, Caroline wasn't just reading bedtime stories or watching cartoons. She was watching Rachel, and the more she watched, the more twisted her thoughts became. Rachel was everything Caroline felt she could never be. Beautiful, talented, popular, graceful. Rachel wasn't just a dancer, she floated through life, glowing, adored by everyone who met her. And Caroline, well, in her journals, she referred to herself as a, quote, pizza face with brown, oily hair and no coordination. She hated her face. She hated her body. But more than anything, she hated that she wasn't Rachel Barber. It wasn't just jealousy, it was an obsession. It's the stuff of psychological horror, the kind that simmers until it explodes. Because Caroline didn't just want to be Rachel's friend, she wanted to be Rachel. And in her deluded, spiraling mind, the only way to do that was to remove Rachel altogether. Once police connected the dots and identified Caroline as the mysterious caller who'd lured Rachel out that night, they moved fast. They raced to Caroline's apartment. No answer at the door. Locked from the inside. So they climbed through a window. Inside, they found Caroline unconscious on her bedroom floor, apparently suffering a seizure brought on by stress when she saw the police outside. But Rachel was nowhere to be found. Still, the pieces were starting to click. This wasn't random. This wasn't spur of the moment. This was a plan that had been brewing in the darkest corners of Caroline Robertson's mind for years. With Caroline now in custody, the police were able to start nailing down the timeline of what had happened in the days leading up to and after Rachel's disappearance. The night of Sunday, February 28, 1999, was the last night Rachel Barber would ever spend at home with her family. She was on the phone with someone that night, a mystery caller. And according to phone records, that caller was Caroline Robertson. Caroline was calling with an offer, $100 if Rachel were to come to her home the next day and participate in a, quote, psychology study. Now, it sounds like a weird prospect, but remember, Rachel is a 15-year-old girl. She is naive, and $100, that's a lot to someone her age. She trusted her, so she was likely just happy to be offered the opportunity. The next day, Monday, March 1st, Rachel told a few people about that job that she had booked for that night, the psychological study. But she was vague about the details. She wouldn't even tell her boyfriend what it was about. When pressed, she told friends not to worry, she'd explain everything tomorrow. But of course, there would be no tomorrow. Now, that morning, her father, Michael, dropped her off at the tram stop, where she was supposed to meet him again later at 6:15 p.m. that evening. Only Rachel never showed. She was last seen on that tram, stunning as always with her dark hair and delicate features, seated beside someone who looked like her total opposite. Rachel's friend Allison from the dance studio just so happened to be on the same tram, and remember, she told the police that Rachel was, quote, striking in contrast with this other girl who was plain-looking. That plain-looking girl was Caroline Robertson. Rachel was still missing, so what happened next can only be pieced together through Caroline's broken confessions and the disturbing evidence that police would later uncover. Now, according to Caroline, the two ladies got off the tram in Pran and walked to her apartment. She said that once they were inside the flat, she put her twisted plan into motion. They ate some pizza, which is believed to have been drugged so that Rachel would be easier to subdue. Then she guided Rachel through meditation as part of that psychology study that Rachel believed she was there to do. While Rachel had her eyes closed and tried to clear her mind, Caroline came up behind her. Psychologist Michael Cruzden wrote a report that claimed, quote, she said that she had told Rachel to think of happy and pleasant things. Caroline said then she went into a trance for a moment, unsure of whether she could actually go through with what she had planned to do. It was a brief moment where Caroline could have spared the young girl's life if she had wanted to. But then she snapped out of this trance and she felt more empowered than ever to move forward with her plan. Caroline came up behind Rachel and wrapped a telephone cord around her neck, the kind that's attached to one of many old handsets that she kept for this very purpose. And then she strangled her until Rachel was lifeless. After the killing was over, Caroline just kept the body there for 2 days, hidden in her wardrobe like she was some kind of doll she had tucked away. The telephone cord was still wrapped around Rachel's neck. Her father even visited during that time, tried to see her at her apartment, and Caroline told him that she was sick. When he tried to enter her room, she closed the door quickly to keep him out. Rachel's body was in there, just steps away, but no one knew. In the days following Rachel's murder, Caroline Robertson all but vanished into herself. On March 2nd, she showed up for work, but she looked so unwell that a concerned coworker ended up driving her home. After that, she disappeared from the office entirely, calling in sick and retreating into the shadows of her apartment, the same apartment where Rachel's body still laid hidden. Later, Caroline knew that she had to do something with the body, so she wrapped Rachel in rugs and placed her body inside a large army duffel bag she'd specifically purchased. That bag has never been found, but she told police she remembered where she left it, on her father's property in Kilmore. Next, she called a taxi to help her move the body. Noticing that the bag was heavy, the driver asked her what was inside the bag, and she told him that it was a sculpture. Basically, that's what this was to her, an art project of stolen identity. When police searched Caroline's apartment, they found a mountain of evidence. One of the most important pieces of key evidence was her journal, which laid out exactly what she had planned to do. One of her journal entries read, quote, on the way to dance school, say that she can't tell anyone that she's meeting me. Drug Rachel, put body into army bags, and disfigure and dump somewhere way out. Another chilling to-do list included, quote, check farm, including bag. Tuesday, arrange bank loan, moving van, night to disguise hair, thoroughly clean house, and steam clean carpet. Yeah, let that sink in. This wasn't a moment of madness. This was meticulously planned, calculated, cold, cruel. She even tried to obtain Rachel's birth certificate. Yep. Investigators found an application for it in her apartment, already filled out. Months before, she had called the Barber family home and asked Rachel's younger sister for her birth date. It was clear that, after the murder, she was planning to assume Rachel's identity. In her writings, Caroline described Rachel like a character in a fairy tale, wild but graceful, rebellious yet pure. She wrote of Rachel's striking appearance, her dancer's frame, pale skin, and hypnotic green eyes, almost like she was cataloging her. She obsessed over Rachel's dyed hair, her talent, her youth, her freedom. To Caroline, Rachel represented the white picket fence family, an idealized life full of beauty, attention, and possibility. And instead of admiring her from afar, Caroline fixated on her, studied her, and ultimately tried to become her in the most horrific way imaginable. This wasn't just a murder. This was a deranged form of identity theft where the victim had to die in order for the killer to become her. Police found her notes, her plans, her lies, all of it documented like some kind of Frankenstein blueprint for reinvention. But one thing was still missing: Rachel Barber. Finally, after days of interrogation and pressure, Caroline cracked. On March 13th, nearly 2 weeks after Rachel had vanished, Caroline told police where they could find her body. Buried in a shallow grave on her father's property next to her cat, Lucy, which she had buried years earlier. And I find something about that fact incredibly disturbing. Like, she buried Rachel next to something else she loved, her pet, like Rachel was just one of her pets. In October of 2000, Caroline Reed Robertson stood in front of the Supreme Court of Victoria and pleaded guilty to the murder of Rachel Barber. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she described herself as a nobody, unhappy, friendless, and desperate to be someone, anyone else. In her warped mind, that someone was Rachel. She told the court that she believed Rachel was pure, everything that she wasn't. Beautiful, popular, talented, loved. And if she couldn't have that kind of life, well, she would steal it. During the proceedings, we learned a lot more about Caroline Reed Robertson and why she did what she did. She didn't just wake up one day and decide to kill. Her unraveling began years earlier, buried in layers of self-hatred and a desperate craving to disappear from herself, or more accurately, to become someone else entirely. From the outside, she was just another quiet girl from the Melbourne suburb of Mont Albert, the eldest of 3 sisters in a seemingly average, middle-class family. But Caroline's inner world, well, it was a war zone. She reportedly struggled with severe depression, eating disorders, and crippling social anxiety all throughout high school. She didn't fit in, she didn't have close friends, and she was drowning in a deep, all-consuming loathing for her own body, her own mind, and her very existence. When she was just 14 years old, she drew a picture of herself. Around the edges of the sketch, she scrawled a list of adjectives that she believed described her best: ugly, fat, stupid, obese, worthless, weird, unwanted, loser, deformed, boring, pathetic, selfish, jealous. It wasn't just a moment of teen insecurity. It was the emotional blueprint of someone teetering on the edge of total identity collapse. Her diaries were filled with painful fixations on appearance and worth. She created detailed self-improvement plans, down to the hour, how she would lose 40 pounds, get a nose job, clear her acne, and finally look like someone worthy of love and success. She even had dreams of becoming an actress or a pop star, idolizing Madonna, yet she felt crushed anytime she spoke those dreams out loud. She wrote, quote, "I was always laughed at when I shared my dream. All my life I have been told by people that I would never be anyone or anything." By 16, Caroline's home life started to splinter. Her parents, Gail and David, divorced, and her relationship with her mother was already rocky. She blamed her mom for her mental illness, for her very existence. In one gutting letter, she asked, "Why didn't she just have an abortion? Sometimes it makes me sick to the stomach that I was produced out of her." Her mother, too, reportedly suffered from depression after Caroline's birth, creating a household where pain was inherited like DNA. She wrote tortured letters to her father pleading for help. She wrote, quote, I get teased badly at school. I get really, really embarrassed. I told Mom, but she hasn't helped. I really, really, really need help. Some of her other writings drifted into poetic despair, describing herself as a troubled, tortured, lost soul that's been thrown into an alien environment full of angels. And then, somewhere along the way, that despair turned to obsession. She began directing all of her envy, rage, and longing towards one person, Rachel Barber. Rachel was a glowing light that Caroline could never reach, so instead, she decided to snuff it out and to try to step into its place. What her writings make chillingly clear is that Caroline wasn't driven by impulse or hatred alone. She was driven by years of internalized loathing and a twisted fantasy of a rebirth, one where she could shed her skin, step into Rachel's life, and become someone that she thought mattered. But instead of rising from her pain, she dragged another innocent soul into it. I say all of this not to make you feel bad for Caroline, but I think it's important we always explore the why. It's obviously not an excuse for what she did. There is never an excuse for taking an innocent life like this. But in talking about the why, maybe it helps us all to find little ways of, possibly preventing it, like being kind to others, not judging people by their looks. Stop bullying. Of course, we'll never be able to stop bullying 100%. So maybe the why helps us to identify people who are at risk of doing this sort of thing and prevent it. A forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Justine Barry Walsh, testified that Caroline was, quote, profoundly disturbed at the time of the murder, but not legally insane. Her actions weren't impulsive. They were cold, calculated, and executed step by step, straight from the pages of her creepy little murder diary. Dr. Barry Walsh said that it was possible that Caroline genuinely believed she could reinvent herself in Rachel's image, like a twisted fairy tale makeover. But instead of a wand and a ball gown, it involved strangulation and a shallow grave. The prosecution laid out the real motive. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about anger. It was obsession, plain and simple. Caroline had fixated on Rachel to the point of wanting to be her. Not metaphorically, literally. She planned to lose weight, get a nose job, legally change her name to Rachel Barber, and start living her life as the girl that she murdered. Well, the Supreme Court wasn't having it. Justice Frank Vincent told her she had killed, quote, to achieve an unrealizable and unreal dream. He said she was driven by envy, not just of Rachel's beauty and charm, but of the life that Rachel was on track to live. A life Caroline knew deep down that she'd never have. He described her as someone with a deeply entrenched personality disorder and a danger to anyone unlucky enough to become her next fixation. Caroline was sentenced to 20 years in prison with a minimum of 14 and a half years before she'd be eligible for parole. But here's the part that's hard to stomach. In 2015, after serving just the minimum 14 and a half years, Caroline was granted parole. And yeah, Rachel's parents tried to fight it. They argued that she had shown no true remorse. And who could blame them? Caroline never reached out, never apologized, never even acknowledged what she had taken from them. This was a woman who strangled their teenage daughter to death with a telephone cord. That kind of violence is unimaginable. And yet, she was a free woman. I can't imagine how Rachel's parents felt. Still, they chose to take the high road. With a media storm brewing after her release, Rachel's family asked that Caroline be left alone to re-enter society and hopefully do something meaningful with her freedom, which is honestly way more grace than most of us can muster, myself included. Caroline has since maintained a very low public profile. Local reports indicate that she was quietly released from prison wearing a baseball cap and was picked up by friends, but she has not engaged with the media. She hasn't given interviews or made any public statements since parole. I mean, why would she? She's now free to go live the life of her choosing, better than the fate that Rachel Barber sadly suffered. And as if this story couldn't get any more unsettling, When Rachel's mother saw Caroline again for the first time after her release, she noticed something chilling, a resemblance, a Rachel-like glint in Caroline's eyes. She had changed her appearance so drastically while behind bars, it was as if she hadn't let go of that fantasy of becoming Rachel. It's the stuff of nightmares, a real-life single white female horror story where jealousy turned fatal and a life full of promise was stolen for nothing more than a delusion. On March 24th, 1999, Rachel Barber was finally laid to rest. Over 850 mourners gathered to say goodbye to the 15-year-old girl whose life had been cut so violently short. Her funeral was overflowing with letters, poems, and mementos from those who loved her, tokens of grief, heartbreak, and disbelief. And tucked into her grave was one haunting symbol, a pair of those blue platform shoes, the high heels that she had wanted so badly she took on that job. The same shoes Caroline Robertson used to bait her into that deadly trap. They were once just a teen girl's fashion dream, but in death, they became a symbol of innocence lost and the twisted betrayal that ended Rachel's life. Her parents, Elizabeth and Mike, they were left to navigate the kind of pain that no parent should ever have to endure. The silence of Rachel's empty dance studio, the ghost of music that she'd never dance to again, the ache of a family portrait with one glaring absence. Her mother would later say, quote, "It felt like the whole world had ended. Our world had." In the years that followed, Rachel's story refused to fade. Her mother, alongside journalist Megan Norris, co-wrote Perfect Victim, a book that digs deep into the psychology behind the crime and the unbearable grief of losing a child in such a senseless way. It gave voice to the unimaginable pain that so many families of murder victims quietly carry, while also shining a light on the dark side of obsession and mental illness. Then in 2009 came In Her Skin, a chilling film adaptation of the case starring Guy Pearce, Miranda Otto, and a haunting performance by Ruth Bradley as Caroline. The film was praised for its raw, eerie portrayal of a teenage girl stolen by jealousy and the ripple effect it left behind. But maybe most importantly, Rachel's story has sparked difficult, necessary conversations about jealousy, about untreated mental illness, about how dangerous it can be to overlook the warning signs hiding in plain sight, especially when the person posing the danger doesn't look like a monster, but a family friend, a babysitter, someone we think we can trust. Rachel Barber should have grown to be a star. She should have danced on stages across the world, not remembered in headlines and documentaries. But even in her death, her story continues to resonate, a tragic reminder of how fragile life can be and how darkness can sometimes wear a familiar face. There's something about this case that just sticks with you. Maybe it's because Rachel was just 15, full of dreams and glitter, the kind of light that only comes from someone who hasn't yet been burned by the world. Or maybe it's because the monster wasn't hiding in a dark alley. She was sitting in the living room, babysitting the kids, smiling at the parents, slowly unraveling in plain sight. Rachel Barber didn't die at the hands of a stranger. She died because someone looked at her joy, her talent, her future, and decided that they couldn't stand watching it bloom. And that kind of envy, the slow, quiet, rotting kind, it's so much harder to see coming, but just as deadly. That's it for me tonight. If you found this story as chilling as I did, please take a second to rate and review Serial Napper, especially if you're listening on Apple or Spotify. It helps so much in getting these stories into more earbuds. And hey, if you want even more true crime cases, the ones that make you question everyone and everything, make sure you're following me over on Patreon. You'll get early access and bonus episodes. Just search Serial Napper on Patreon. I also have the link in my show notes. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and don't trust anyone who wants to be you. Bye.